It's me, and thanks so much for agreeing to bring our ideas together for this letter. You should have already received input from some of our members. Let's speak later.
Dear Executive Vice President.
Dear Mr. Timmermans.
Dear Frans.
We are the leaders of some of Europe's biggest manufacturing and tech companies.
Some 60 CEOs and chairs of companies across the full spectrum of industry.
From healthcare innovation to steel manufacturing and energy generation to telecommunication and packaging.
And everything, but literally everything in between.
At this transformative time, we share your desire to turn the tide of climate change.
Like you, we believe that now is the opportunity for the EU to take the lead in global climate action.
To make Europe stronger globally and to become more competitive and to leave nobody behind. Our customers expect us to have an ambitious approach to sustainability.
Our investors and shareholders demand we find a path to climate neutrality by 2050.
Our boards insist on visions and strategies that will enable the companies we lead to thrive.
And we are eager to meet all of these expectations.
However, when you operate hundreds of facilities,
when you provide 5 million jobs worldwide,
when you have to profoundly reshape your processes and technologies and also convince your supply chain and customers, well, epic changes are required.
We are taking action and want to do more.
Because just like you, we want to create a better world for future generations.
The European Green Deal that you are driving will be instrumental to the journey we have embarked on.
We have lots of ideas we would like to discuss with you in a Euronews debate on February 15th.
Will you join us? Sincerely, the members of the European Roundtable for Industry.
Let's make this debate count.
Hello there, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to this latest edition of Euronews Debates. This time, focusing on the EU's Green Deal and brought to you in partnership with ERT. That's the European Roundtable for Industry. My name is Meabh McMahon, and as a reporter for Euronews, I have covered numerous climate change protests, pre-COVID of course, and I've interviewed hundreds of people from all walks of life on the topic, from farmers to miners to activists. So it's an absolute pleasure today to sit down, virtually of course, with the chairs and CEOs of some of the biggest and oldest companies in the world, from the industrial and technology sector. And also with the EU's Mr. Climate Change himself, that is the Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans. Because if Europe is to reach its ambitious goal of climate neutrality by 2050 and reduce emissions by 2030 already, we and you, of course, will have to change the way we consume. But without large industrial companies Now, for its part, the European Roundtable of Industry that employs 5 million people globally has put its position on the table. ERT says it's ready to step up to the challenge, but wants Europe to keep its position in the world. Now, a little bit later on, we will be hearing what comments and questions and concerns some NGOs and labour unions have for our panellists. They've kindly pre-taped their interventions for us. But we'd also like to hear from you. Please leave your comments and your questions and your remarks in the comments box right under this video, and I'll do my best to bring them all in. You can also post them on Instagram or, of course, Twitter. And I try to keep them relatively short so we can get around to them. But for now, let's get to know our panel. So joining us today from Athens is Dimitri Papalexopoulos. Dimitri Papalexopoulos is the Vice Chair of the European Roundtable for Industry, and he's also the Chairman of the Executive Committee of Titan Cement Group. That's an international cement and buildings material producer that's been around since 1902. So good afternoon, Dimitri. Thanks so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Hi, and greetings from snowy Athens, which I believe is actually colder and less sunny today than Brussels. So there's climate change for you. Happy to be here.
We're all dreaming of going there soon sometime on holidays when COVID allows. Great to have you with us, Dimitri. We're so happy that you could join us. And joining us today from his home, I believe, in the Netherlands, we have Frans Timmermans. Frans Timmermans is a well-known Dutch politician, and he's currently one of the most powerful people in Brussels, if you like, when it comes to the EU Green Deal. He was the man put in charge of the signature policy of Ursula von der Leyen, her man on the moon moment. Frans Timmermans, great to have you with us. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm fine, but I'm in Brussels, so that's close to the office where I need to be these days.
Oh, great. So you're just across the road from us here at Euronews. Well, it's great to have you with us. We're really looking forward to your intervention. So nice to have you with us. We also have Helge Lund. Helge Lund is a Norwegian businessman, and he's the chairman of BP since January 2019. That's, of course, the British oil and gas multinational that's headquartered in London. Helge Lund, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Meabh. Good to see you. Good to be here.
Let me move over to Copenhagen and say hello to Jim Snabe. Jim Snabe is a Danish businessman, and he's currently the chairman of Siemens and Maersk. That's the Danish shipping company. Now, Jim also lectures at Copenhagen Business School in leadership, responsible business and change management. And he's also a member of the board of trustees at the World Economic Forum. So Jim Snabe, great to have you with us. A busy plate you've got there.
It is, but I couldn't imagine a better topic than how to accelerate sustainability. So thanks for the opportunity.
Well, looking forward to your input. And now we head to Stuttgart in Germany, where Ola Kallenius is standing by. Ola Kallenius is a Swedish businessman. He started his career, in fact, back at Daimler-Benz in 1993 as a trainee. And now, today in 2021, he's the chairman of the board of management of Daimler, and he's the head of Mercedes-Benz. Ola Kallenius, thanks so much for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, good afternoon. It's great to be with you this afternoon and talk about sustainability and also what the automotive industry is doing in this regard.
I'm sure, which has a huge role, of course, to play. And joining us now from Brussels, from Belgium, where I am as well, is Ilham Kadri. Ilham Kadri is a French-Moroccan businesswoman with a background in science. She's currently the CEO of the Belgian chemical company Solvay. And according to Fortune magazine, she's one of the most powerful business leaders in the world. Ilham Kadri, it's great to have you with us. How does it feel to be the only woman on today's panel?
I feel good, Meabh. Thank you for having me and greeting from Brussels. Very glad to be with you today.
Great to have you with us, Mrs. Kadri. And then, last but not, of course, least, we head over to sunny Spain, to Madrid, to say hello to Ignacio Galán. Ignacio Galán is a Spanish businessman and an engineer who is the CEO of Iberdrola since 2001. That is, of course, a global energy company that supplies energy to 100 million people worldwide. And according to the Financial Times, Mr. Galán was responsible for transforming Iberdrola from a domestic company with coal, nuclear and oil-fired power plants into the third biggest utility in the world and a clean energy specialist. Ignacio Galán, great to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having this opportunity to share with you our experience over the last 20 years already trying to make this energy transition, which I think that's good. Nevertheless, I think we are already in Madrid. I think the weather is not as bad in other areas in Europe, but I think it's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. And you've even worn a green tie for the occasion, which is, of course, matching your logo there. Great to have you with us, Ignacio Galán. So now we have gotten to know our panelists, and now let's hear what they have to say. So I'd like to invite Dimitri Papalexopoulos, that is the Vice Chair of EORT, to elaborate a little bit more on EORT's plans towards climate neutrality. Dimitri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Meabh. Let me say clearly up front that we fully endorse, as EORT, the Commission's ambition to make Europe the world's first climate neutral continent by 2050. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but because if we get this right, it represents an opportunity to make Europe more sustainable and more prosperous. Having said that, we are clearly facing an immensely complex and transformational challenge. We don't have all the answers. Most of the rest of the world is not following at the same pace. And 2050 may sound far away, but 30 years is actually a pretty short time to get to where we need to be. So success necessitates decisive action by all: governments, companies, scientists and consumers, and of course informed citizens, all aligned and pulling in the same direction. Encouragingly, there is an emerging consensus on many key areas. One central idea is that of complementing the overarching climate policy with an ambitious industrial strategy that boosts European competitiveness and an equally ambitious energy transition strategy that ensures energy security, affordability, and fairness. Think of it as a golden triangle with climate at the top and competitiveness and energy at the base. A number of policy choices flow from that. That we need to put a price on all carbon emissions while maintaining a level playing field with the rest of the world, just to make sure the right incentives are in place. That we should accelerate the pace of research, innovation, and entrepreneurship to get the breakthroughs we need and to make sure that the fruits benefit Europe. That we must invest heavily in building the necessary infrastructure for electrification, for mobility, for digital, for hydrogen, for telecoms, for the necessary raw materials. That we encourage consumers to embrace green products and make informed choices. And that we recognize that not everyone will be a winner, and we must effectively support those individuals, those regions, those sectors who will be facing an uphill battle so that no one is left behind. At ERT, we have laid out actionable ideas on how to deal with these challenges in a recent publication entitled Making the Most of Europe's Climate Leadership. They synthesize the global perspectives of our members, which, as pointed out, represent very diverse sectors of European industry, including the technology leaders, the heavy industrials, the consumer companies, the energy producers. They provide input on how to get from lighthouse projects and leadership to full-scale transformation. Frans Timmermans has provided inspiration, direction, realism, and prodigious energy, I would add, in getting the Green Deal as far as it has come already. Mr. Vice President, thank you for agreeing to join us in today's debate. So, in summary, the challenge is, how can we get everyone on board to implement the Green Deal in a way that actually strengthens Europe's position in the world? So that's how we would frame the issue. Meabh, back to you.
Well, thank you so much for those introductory remarks, Dimitri. I'd now like to bring in Frans Timmermans. He's, of course, the Vice President of the European Commission. He's, of course, responsible for climate change. And there, Dimitri, you commended him for his inspiration, direction and realism when it came to his work on the EU Green Deal, because it hasn't been easy now, of course, with COVID-19 and vaccines dominating, if you like, the daily turnover at the Parlement. So, Frans Timmermans, what would your message today be to ERT after you've heard their introductory comments?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the ERT for all these years of leadership. And, you know, I'm turning 60 in a couple of months' time. I've got sort of 30 years in European affairs at least. And I can guarantee you, mostly city miles. So pretty tough times. And the ERTs have always been on the side of daring to rethink things that need to be rethought. And in that context, I really welcome their forward-looking contribution to the transformation we'll have to go through. You know, when we came up with the Green Deal, we knew already that the Green Deal should be the basis to face the climate crisis, that we at the same time have a biodiversity crisis bordering on ecocide, frankly, huge threat to our existence. And at the same time, we're in the middle of the fastest industrial revolution humanity's ever experienced, which affects the globe, which affects every nation, every living person on this nation at the same time. And then, of course, the pandemic struck. Pandemic which you cannot dissociate from the lack of balance between ourselves and our natural environment. We are not living within the boundaries Mother Earth gives us, and that has consequences, negative consequences. So we need to correct that. And so we have this unique opportunity to do a lot of things in one go. Fortunately, our leaders have been able to agree on mobilizing 1.8 trillion for the recovery after to face the economic consequences of the pandemic. And we have this unique opportunity to use the European Green Deal as the principle along which we will do this restructuring and investment in recovery. It is incredibly important because we are borrowing from the future, in fact, now to recover. If we invest this in the right way, in the economy of the future, if we decarbonize our economy, if we switch to renewable energy, if we use the positive effects of the Industrial Revolution for the whole of society, then the investments we will be doing in the next couple of years will have huge returns. And then we can proudly say to our children and grandchildren, look, we fixed this just in time. We were much too late coming to the party, but we were just in time to set things on the right course. If we miss this opportunity, and I'm talking about the next years, we're not talking about decades. If we miss this opportunity in the next years to set the course towards climate neutrality in 2050, reduction of emissions by 55% by 2030, setting all the legislative framework so that businesses and citizens understand what needs to be done. If we don't do it in the next couple of years, I don't think our kids and grandkids will ever forgive us, because we will then give them a society with a lot of conflicts that are almost unavoidable. If we don't change course, and I don't want to sound over dramatic, I know full well I will sound over dramatic, but it is true. If we don't change course, our children will fight wars over water and clean air. And if we do change course, we can unleash an incredible potential that is inherent in our society. We can set our economy on a new course. If you look what has been done in the energy sector over the last couple of years, incredible the speed with which the energy sector understands it needs to change. If you look at what's happening in the automotive sector, who would have thought this was possible 5 years ago? The speed with which electrification is happening, the speed with which new technologies are being adopted, the speed with which hydrogen is coming into the game across the board in our industry. If you look at what's happening in the steel industry, the cement industry, yes, the challenges are huge, but the opportunities match the challenges. And we in the public sector need to make sure we create the right framework within which industry can transform itself into sustainable sectors. And let me end on one notion which I think is crucial in all of this. This is not going to be easy. It's going to be bloody hard. It's going to be very hard. And indeed, some people will make this change easily and see huge opportunity. And for some people, this is a huge risk, and they might resist it because they're afraid they'll be left with the short end of the stick. So we need to make sure we convince our citizens by showing that we will leave no one behind. And industry starts with its own negotiations and talks with the trade unions, with their employers, with the supply chains. And I know it's extremely difficult, but we at the European Commission will be on your side to try and shape things, to try and correct when it's not working well, and especially to keep convincing the national governments that they should submit their plans for recovery in line with the need to transform our economy to make it sustainable within the next, start this process within the next couple of years. Looking forward to the discussion, the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice President of the Commission there, Frans Timmermans, giving some introductory remarks and reminding everyone that's viewing today, and reminding, of course, the panellists that, quote, it's going to be bloody hard. Well, let's move on now to Helge Lund from BP. Helge, economists have said that the best and the only way perhaps to reduce carbon emissions is to put a price on them. What would you have to say about carbon pricing, and how should it be used?
Thank you, Meabh, for this opportunity. I represent BP, an integrated energy company, and we fully support the Green Deal's aim to make Europe climate neutral by 2050. not only because it's real political leadership on the greatest long-term challenge we face, but also because the Green Deal is a plan to turn that challenge into an opportunity, as together we invest billions of euros rewiring our energy system. And this is where business has such an important role. And not only Europe's green, brilliant companies in wind, solar, and hydrogen, but as important, perhaps more important, are Europe's greening companies, companies who are not green yet, but who have the ambition to become so. These companies must be encouraged to take risks, allocate capital, drive innovation, and also scale technology. And if they are to do so effectively, efficiently, and above all, also fairly, we need a carbon pricing. At its most simple, carbon pricing means that those who emit carbon should pay a price for that carbon. And at its best, it's effective because it incentivizes cleaner choices. It is efficient as it harnesses market forces. And it's also fair. Those who emit the most carbon pay the highest price. And it can as such support a just transition. The good news is that 45% of Europe's emissions are already covered by carbon pricing. We need to reach 100%. And we need to do something else too. It would be a tragedy if Europe's businesses committed to change only to be undercut by those operating more cheaply in places where there is no carbon price. It would cost Europe jobs, but worse, it could lead to an increase in emissions as businesses relocate to places without the same environmental protections as in Europe. A big part of the answer is a carbon border adjustment. It means that anyone supplying carbon-intensive goods to Europe should also pay a carbon price, just like companies operating within Europe. Designed well, it could protect European jobs through creating a green level playing field for business. And best of all, it could help protect our planet too, incentivizing countries around the globe to speed their own journey to net zero. Thank you, Meabh.
Thank you, Helge. And there are, of course, plans. The European Commission are planning to come out with a proposal on that carbon border adjustment mechanism, I think, in July. So hopefully Frans Timmermans, the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, can elaborate a little bit later. But now we can move on and hear from Jim Snabe, the chairman of Siemens and Merckx, and ask Jim, really, do you have already the technologies available to achieve this carbon neutrality?
Well, thank you very much. And yes, I believe we do have. I remember a year ago in Davos in January 2020, we discussed the need to dramatically accelerate climate action. And the concern at that time was, can we afford it? And since then, COVID has locked countries down. And as a consequence, we have actually reduced emissions by 8% in 2020. So if anything, COVID has demonstrated that it's possible, even if a global lockdown clearly is not the right solution to this problem. So what is the solution? Well, I believe it's technology. And I am convinced that we are at an inflection point when it comes to sustainable technology. I think this is true in two dimensions, both on the supply side and on the demand side. On the supply side, we talked about it already, the remarkable progress on renewable energy like solar and wind has really reached an inflection point where a kilowatt hour created by renewable energy sources has become cheaper than fossil-based energy sources, even coal. That combined with smart power grids, which enable us to generate and distribute sustainable energy efficiently. And finally, also new technologies like hydrogen and power to X, where we can store and convert green electricity into synthetic fuels that we can use to power trucks, ships, and even airplanes. And I think the same is true on the demand side. When we add digitization to the physical products, the cars, the factories, the buildings, the transportation systems, we enable a dramatic reduction of the CO2 footprint of such products, and we increase asset utilization, and with that, of course, we reduce also resource consumption. So I'm concluding, based on the insights I have from Siemens and Maersk, that we have the technologies available today, but we need to adapt, and accelerate the adoption of these technologies. And so the key question is not, do we have the technologies, but how do we accelerate the adoption? And again, I think we have an inflection point. I mean, companies are now investing in climate-friendly solutions, not to be philanthropic. It has become good business to reduce emissions. Investors are investing in ESG-oriented companies because climate-friendly companies deliver a higher return at a lower risk, and consumers are beginning to vote with their spending. But I don't think that's enough, and that's why this discussion is so important. We also need the policymakers to help accelerate the adoption. And I think we have a unique opportunity. Timmermans already talked about. For the first time in history, governments have put enormous amounts of euros into recovering the economy after COVID-19. Imagine if we could dedicate these recovery funds to build sustainable infrastructures for the future around energy, manufacturing, transportation, cities, and even agriculture. Imagine if we could take the lead in making these infrastructures intelligent by investing in Internet of Things, 5G, industrial clouds, AI. I call it industrial AI. And imagine if we can accelerate green public procurement of sustainable products. Then I think Europe can not only be a showcase for sustainable infrastructures, but at the same time create growth by exporting such technologies to the rest of the world. I always say that we're lucky to be leaders in times of radical change, but with that luck comes an enormous obligation to lead and drive the needed changes. We must accelerate the adoption of these new technologies to create that sustainable future. And the good news is, it is good business to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim Snabe, for those opening remarks. And I'm sure if it wasn't for COVID-19, the Friday for Futures marches would very much be vividly happening on the streets, because they're happening still very much online, with a lot of pressure on all of you and on, of course, regulators and on EU member states to do their bit. But for now, we can move on now to Ola Kallenius from Daimler. Good afternoon, Ola. And I guess the goals for reducing emissions of greenhouse gases in the Paris Agreement require a lot of the mobile sector. So what can you tell us about consumer demand when it comes to CO2 neutral mobility? What needs to be done?
Yes, absolutely, Maeve. And I would like to talk about the most powerful allies for our common vision towards climate and CO2 neutrality, the consumers, because they will in a large way determine whether CO2 neutral products, technologies, and ultimately then the Green Deal succeed or fail. Three things are at the top of the list to bring consumers with us on this journey. First, of course, attractive and affordable products. And global effort is underway to build a battery, lithium ion, and hydrogen industrial system. At the moment, it's not fully competitive with the cost of carbon-based fuels, and it's our job to try to close that gap. Even from an affluent consumer's perspective, a more expensive product still must be a more attractive product. Today, more and more truly fascinating zero-emission cars are hitting the market, and a growing number of customers is willing and able to make the switch, and I think that's great. However, for many less affluent consumers, the practical and economic challenge of zero-emission cars remains significant. And yet, I would say mobility remains something like a basic human right. And that's why e-mobility cannot be the preserve of the wealthy. We need to work together to reduce what Bill Gates calls the green premium. It's maybe the same challenge food producers are facing. Organic is better for the environment and for the consumer, yet organic foods cost more. So if the widespread adoption of e-mobility and organic foods and other products is supposed to go up, then their prices need to go down. And this requires innovation on the part of the industry. as well as foresight on the part of policymakers. Second, we need to improve e-mobility convenience, especially in terms of infrastructure. The European auto industry has a clear technology path to achieve CO2 neutrality. That's a course that's been set. But the charging infrastructure build-out lags behind. It's not sufficiently coordinated. It differs greatly by region and cannot be solved in the first go by just market mechanism alone. What we need is a comprehensive electric charging and selective hydrogen refueling infrastructure across the entire EU by 2030, from Athens in the south to Kiruna in the north of Sweden, and from Bilbao to Bucharest. And to have a net positive impact on the environment, this infrastructure needs to be, of course, powered by green energy. And third, it was touched upon before, we need fairness in the governance of the transformation. And that means establishing a consistent political framework with reliable long-term goals and guidelines. This would provide the auto industry and Europe's consumers the necessary planning certainty needed to make those investments. And such a political framework should also include an expanded EU emissions trading system across all sectors, including the mobility sector. To summarize, while everyone in this meeting shares the same commitment to CO2 neutrality, we need to do and ensure we do everything we can to smooth out this complex journey. And that means respecting the needs, the rights, and the purchasing power of Europe's consumers by making CO2 neutrality attractive and affordable via innovation, by making it convenient via infrastructure, and by making it fair via appropriate regulation. Of course, we know this is a complex task, but I'm very confident that we can achieve this. Thank you. Over to you, Meabh.
Thank you. A complex task indeed, but you're confident that you can achieve it. Well, let's now hear from Ilham Kadri. She is the CEO of Solvay, and she's based right here in Brussels, in Belgium. Hi again. And you tell us, what does the Green Deal mean in general for European industry? How do you think it'll survive and, of course, prosper? Because that's what it is all about as well.
Well, first of all, as a mother, a European citizen, an ERT member and CEO of Solvay, I want the EU Green Deal to be a success. And achieving this economy-wide change, it will require a deep industrial transformation to make Europe the world's first climate neutral continent in a way. So now the challenge will be to balance properly this ambition with the need to keep Europe competitive worldwide, as was already shared by my peers, for maintaining its industry and innovation base in Europe. So as an introduction, I want to address briefly 2 points. First, the EU Green Deal is an opportunity and not a burden if well prepared and well deployed. Second, we believe that Europe should become the best place to innovate in the world if we want to become sustainable, including securing the right level of upskilling and reskilling funds to reinvent the EU workforce of 2030. So first, to decarbonize its industry, Europe needs to modernize its aging industrial infrastructure, digitalize it, build new supply chain around clean energy, clean mobility, end-to-end supply chain for essentials or digital. And in fact, we will not achieve climate neutrality in Europe without significantly lowering the current level of CO2 emissions and further improving our production processes to decrease the carbon footprint, as industries have been labeled as part of the problem, but we are part of the solution. And this, in fact, involves substantial investments from which public and private funding is necessary to remain competitive. Let me give you a simple example. In some countries, such as Bulgaria, for example, there is no alternative to coal yet. While in other cases, a whole new ecosystem or value chain has to be developed. We did it in the case of Solvay's plant in Rheinberg, Germany, for example, where we've been switching from fossil fuels to scrap wood, and we reduced emission by 25%, while also delivering electricity to the public grid, more than 30,000 households. But this has been enabled the sourcing of biomass in the region required mobilization of the community of entrepreneurs, building a circular ecosystem, and also the German authorities, without which it would not have been possible. And such projects can only continue at the necessary pace and scale if supported by public-private partnership. Another example, to make Green Deal reality in clean mobility, as Ola said, we need infrastructure such as charging station, electric hybrid. We are lagging behind in Europe. Green hydrogen, which still represents less than 1% of production in Europe today, and it will be at scale and competitive in 2030 if we start today building up the infrastructure in storage, transportation, renewable. And my second point, Europe should become the best place to innovate for industry if we want to create jobs and geopolitical strategic value chain in Europe. Therefore, delivering the EU Green Deal should go hands in hand with an attractive Europe for investment and innovation. And the climate and digital transition imply huge costs. As industry, we need to invest in those new energies and in upskilling its people. And all this to take place under these difficult economic condition. We have an economy which needs to be repaired and heavy international pressure. And we acknowledge that the level of financial support, as it has been said, has been upgraded during the COVID crisis to save the economy and repair it if well deployed by the member of states. So for innovation to flourish, our industry expects regulatory environment, and we need to continue encouraging investors to invest in companies with the will to change, to move from high-intense energy to cleaner ones, walk the talk, because we need these capital inflows. They are indispensable to achieve together the Green Deal, which is good for the people, the planet, and the pocket. And as a conclusion, the ERT members, as it was said by Dimitri, firmly believe that the EU Green Deal is an opportunity. It can become a success if we work together to create the right policies framework, while reskilling and upskilling is absolutely necessary. And with the right institutional alignments and support, we stand ready to do our part. And as Frans said, this is not going to be easy, but we are not here because it's easy. We are here because it's hard. And now with the EU ambition, the ingenuity and the talent, we can do it. Thank you. Back to you, Meabh.
Okay, thanks Ilham Kadri for those remarks. And now we can head over to Madrid and hear from Ignacio Galán, the CEO of Iberdrola, and ask him really about how this energy transition can be effective and fair, a big word that we've heard as well there from Ilham Kadri.
So, thank you very much. I would like to send two messages very directly. The first one is renewable will make energy cheaper for industries and for households. Well, renewables is already today the most competitive source of energy, and we need to expand in. The second one is the electricity system is and will continue to be reliable, will be not blackout. We have already demonstrated during the pandemic that even in the worst circumstances, the lights were already on in all European countries. So we must invest and develop digitalized networks that are the backbone, I think I use words of the Vice President Timmermans, is the backbone of the system based in renewables and in efficient storage. Efficient storage, which today is pumping hydro, batteries, and others like green hydrogen. I think Europe can be the leader in the decarbonization of our economies. I'm absolutely convinced of that. Because first, we have already a massive social support. I think when we started already 20 years ago trying to make this energy transition, so we have not such a social support. And we have not the political leadership which today's the European Union, the most member states are already giving us with a Green Deal. It will allow us to reach our climate goals and recover from the crisis at the same time. It's possible. In our case, I have to say, we have decarbonized massively, and this has made it more competitive and profitable business. I think far from being negative was positive. And we will be, our commitment is will be climate neutral in Europe in 2030. 50 years ago, we were already a traditional utility. We are not any longer. But we need to be fast. Everybody is already mentioning the same thing. The time is now. We have the technology and the funding. The Energy Generation EU program will be crucial to accelerate transition. And it will create incentive for private investment as well. We must benefit from these billions or trillions that are going to be invested in energy transition globally. As companies, we are ready to invest and to do our part. And I think everybody is on board now, but that is positive as well. We will continue the decarbonization of our companies, but also helping, and that is very important in this particular moment, recover traditional sectors as we have already done in the past. I think 20 years ago, we believed in wind energy, but we did not have turbines. So we reconvert traditional sectors, such as shipyard or aviation industry, in order to manufacturing them. Today, we have the same challenge. Green hydrogen is a very promising technology, but we need more powerful electrolyzers to generate it. If we want all this to be manufactured in Europe and create jobs, we need to move fast now. We will also need public authorities to do their part. Establishing an attractive framework for investment. I think Green Deal is fine, but I think we have to apply that in the national plans as well. Something which always I used to say, in faster permitting processes. We need to adapt administration to the green economy. I think it's continue taking 5 times longer the permitting than the construction of whatever thing in this moment in Europe. Also, I think it's crucial, was mentioned as well before, reforming our taxation system to make renewables even more competitive under the principle, who pollutes pay principle. Promoting energy union as well is needed, and increasing interconnection, because we need to be able to move the energy from one place to another one. It's not sent to generate with solar in North Europe and to generate with wind in the south of Europe. I think we need already to cross through the interconnection. All this will allow us to recover faster, reconvert traditional sectors, and create quality jobs. Improving at the same time competitiveness of our industry. I would just like to conclude saying that the transition is necessary because taking care of the planet is a moral obligation. We need to leave a better world to future generations. But now we do not have to choose between cost and environment. We can have both. Thank you.
Thank you, Ignacio Galán. And now I'd like to bring in again the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans, to react a little bit to those introductory remarks. And in the meantime, you can start posting your questions underneath that video that I'll be hopefully getting around to as soon as I can. I've already got lots coming in. So after Frans Timmermans, your reaction to that, we can kick off with we might then speed up the pace a little bit with questions, because I have a lot coming in already. So Frans, would you like just to react first to the introductory remarks there?
First of all, let me be very clear about the dimension of the investments we need. Already pre-pandemic, we estimated that we would need at least 350 billion euros annually extra to make this transformation happen. So indeed, capital markets are ready and many investors are ready. But we're talking about dimensions that we haven't seen before. And indeed, in relatively short period of time, this money needs to be mobilized. And what we can do is to create the right legislative framework to make sure that we have this climate law in place that would discipline member states to do the right things, that we offer full transparency in preparing legislation, whether it's on emissions, whether it's on strengthening the emissions trading system, etc. Full transparency, and then we become predictable and we stay consistent over the next decade in sticking to the framework, so that we create a predictable environment for investors, but also for industries that need to invest in the new technologies, and they need some time. You know, if you take the car industry, for instance, you know, you need a couple of years to restruct to be able to deliver the new technologies of the future. Second comment that was made also by others, we need to be able to say to those outside of Europe who would not take the right measures, taking in the right direction, that we will protect European industry if others do not move towards climate neutrality. If the risk of carbon leakage is big, or if the risk of unfair competition is big, we will not hesitate to put in place carbon border adjustment mechanisms, but we have to be surgical about them. We have to be very precise in which sectors, vis-a-vis which countries, this should then be applied, so that we can demonstrate that we're fighting the risk of carbon leakage and false competition, and that we're not introducing protectionism. We will need to also defend this at WTO, and I believe if we do it in this way, as the Commission is now working on, it will also be possible to do that. I fully agree with the fact that we need to invest much more in the charging infrastructure for EVs, for electric vehicles in Europe, and for fuel cells based on hydrogen in Europe. Much more, because I think everyone has underestimated, at the end of the day, the pickup of EVs by the consumers. Mr. Kallenius mentioned the consumers. I think something is changing there, and I believe that within the foreseeable future, the next 3-4 years, the price difference between internal combustion engine cars and EVs will be so small that the choice will be made easier for average consumers, not just for people who can afford it. And then the bottleneck will become the charging infrastructure, because people will have anxiety whether their car can be charged, etc. So we, as public authorities, together with industry, we need to make sure that industry takes up the charging infrastructure where it is economically, commercially viable, and that public authorities provide for infrastructure where perhaps it's not that economically viable yet. Hydrogen, we've just seen plans announced. When we came out with our hydrogen strategy, we said very ambitiously we would go for 40 gigawatts of green hydrogen by 2030. Now we've seen one consortium coming out with plans that would lead to more than 60 gigawatts of green hydrogen by 2030. So also there you see development going very quickly, but also here it's a matter of physical infrastructure to transport the hydrogen where it is needed. So when we invest in transitional energy sources, such as will be necessary in countries that are still heavily dependent on coal, we have to make sure that the infrastructure we build is sort of pre-fitted also to be able to transport hydrogen in the near future. This is something we will certainly need to do. And finally, I think if we talk about sustainability, I have to say that I'm so happy to have Ms. Kadri on this panel today, and I've just made the decision, listening to everyone. I will no longer take part in panels with only men from now on. So that is also, I think, an element of sustainability that we have to bring to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Frans Timmermans. Yeah, they're dubbed manels. I've been to a lot of them myself here in Brussels, but Ilham Kadri is doing a lot, of course, to change that. But anyway, back to the topic. This, of course, we would have loved to have had in a live studio with a live audience, bringing in lots of different questions from different stakeholders and different people from all walks of life who have something to say in the climate. But because of COVID, we're doing it this way. But we do have lots of comments coming in. So I'm going to start bringing them into our panellists. So the first one here from Francisco from Granada. He says, I feel that working class people are not that concerned about climate change. They have other pressing issues on their mind, like paying bills and making ends meet. How, Francisco asks, can we bring the working class on board when introducing policies regarding the Green Deal? Perhaps we'll bring that question to Ignacio Galán, perhaps he's over in Spain. And
I think I think consumer will benefit from energy transition, and not any doubt, because of the job creation and the economy growth as well. But also because we will offer him a cheaper energy, as well as another products that are very efficient. For instance, the heat pumps that are much more efficient than traditional heating system, which are then made cheaper. In general, we will offer very competitive solutions to cover the electrification of mobility and cooling and heating. I would like some point, we was already mentioned by Commissioner, related infrastructure, charging infrastructure. I think I absolutely agree. I think I know already my experience in the telecom industry when we start with mobile telephony is that the people was thinking the penetration is going to be much slower than it was. I think the EVs, in my opinion, is going to happen something like. I think chargers will be not the problem. The problem will be the infrastructure behind chargers. And still, unfortunately, the legislation in many countries doesn't allow ourselves to make the necessary investment in grid for already had prepared for the installation of chargers. I think putting chargers of whatever size is not a problem. There are plenty of manufacturers that we can deploy in a huge, in very speedy manner, if the permits allow us to make that. But behind is needed already megawatts of that one. If we would like to make already chargers in a motorway for trucks, I think we need already several megawatts And there, the grid is not prepared for that one. We need to reinforce the grid very much. And I think there is still there limitation in countries, and the regulator doesn't allow ourselves to make already the necessary investment on that one. So I think by President will be delighted if you can already influence to pull out the restriction we have today for making that happen. So I think in Spain, for instance, we have already 0.13%, 0.14% now percent of the GDP maximum investment allowed in the country for that one. What is the connection between GDP and needs of charges? I don't know. Please, I have already told you several times, but I think we need to already, same thing with permits, that one we have to take out all these restrictions and limitations.
Okay, Ignacio Galán, let's pause now and bring in a question we have from Industrial All. It's a labour union, and they're based here in Brussels, but they represent people and workers from all around Europe. Let's take a listen to what they had to say and what they want to bring to the table to today's discussion.
My name is Luc Triangle. I'm General Secretary of Industrial Europe, the European Trade Union Federation, organizing more than 7 million workers in industry. COVID-19 has exposed and entrenched deep inequalities within our societies and between our countries. Increasing precariousness at work and economic insecurity are corrosive to a sustainable European economy and industry. Politicians have a direct responsibility for delivering a just transition for all workers and all regions. How will this be achieved without increasing and entrenching inequalities between and within countries? All too often, the social dimension of industrial policy is reduced to a debate on skills and training, which are very important elements, but not sufficient as adequate social dimension. As Europe looks to update its industrial strategy in line with the Green Deal and the commitment to a just transition, isn't time that the quality of work, a regional re-industrialization agenda for all European regions, and social inclusion throughout the EU were integrated as central pillars and not treated as Cinderella topics? Thank you.
Social inclusion. We all, of course, have the images of the Gilets jaunes fresh in our heads. I'd like to hear perhaps from Ilham Kadri on that, and then maybe from the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans. And if anyone else would like to raise their point on this, either just give a little wave as well. But Ilham Kadri, I'd like to address that question there to you first.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Meabh, and we appreciate the collaboration, by the way, between Industry All and my company, Solvay. This transformation is indeed very real and fast-paced. And I would like to respond addressing maybe 2 items for the sake of time, and concrete ones. It's the inclusion in the frame of, social inclusion, diversity as well, and maybe the digital transformation. On inclusion, obviously we consider each of our employees as citizen of the group wherever they are located. This is how we develop our programs that transcend the social inequalities. The social inclusion is an important element of the EU agenda, but EU Green Deal and in our agendas as companies, and that's nobody should be left behind. And in this time of crisis, and obviously of top line shrinking, and many of our, automotive, aerospace have been really suffering. We have the same cross-cutting approach to for example, in our company, we created the Solvay Solidarity Fund. And in the timing where people were arguing about dividends and no dividends, we asked our investors to donate parts of their dividends to this Solvay Solidarity Fund to help people in need. And they did so. We collected in record time 15 million euro, which we deployed, to support the community. So that's what I call responsible capitalism. And indeed, there need to be also strengthening up the gender equality, and to get more diversity at the top. You need to help men and spouses to help these women to also reach the top. And at Solvay, we have extended our parental leave to 16 weeks worldwide, regardless of the gender and the sexual orientation. We also realized during the crisis and the COVID-19 the way of digitalization and teleworking, and that there is a need of reskilling and upskilling our workforce. It's key in the context of the implementation of new technologies and digitalization. I'm not a digital native, right? So we can learn it, we can reskill our people, and it's important for our workforce today to really get that training, development, which will include appropriate initiative and resources in this area. And shortly after my arrival, we signed actually global framework agreements on digital transformation with our social partner. It's not easy. We are an industrial company. We have many manufacturing sites, and we need to support our workforce, including blue collars, to get into that upskilling and reskilling, because the chemical industry I represent needs actually more digital competencies and data scientists to reinvent our industry 4.0 than maybe, the traditional chemical engineering background. And this will have a significant impact on organization, including working condition and the occupation of employees. Back to you, Meabh.
Okay, Frans Timmermans, would you like to come in there?
Oh, absolutely. I think the short-term issue, of course, is linked to the crisis we're seeing now that needs to be addressed. The positive thing, obviously, is that given demographics in Europe and given the potential of our economic development, every single person in Europe will be needed to work. So the risk of mass unemployment is not going to be linked to a lack of jobs. The risk of mass unemployment is going to be linked to a lack of skills if we're not very careful. And a lack of skills, non-availability of skilled workforce will be a driving force for industry to leave Europe. So we're really, this is the nexus. We have to make sure that in this transformation, all interested parties, whether in the private sector, but especially in the public sector, make sure that skilling and reskilling becomes almost a natural thing we do. And I think if we get that right, that's already an important issue. But we're also faced with long-term problems, things that have gone wrong over decades. I think it's probably not everyone wants to hear this when I say this, but I think it is pretty obvious by now that the ideology that would have us think that there's something like trickle-down economics did not work. And that we have a huge redistribution problem within our society. The gap between those doing well, those doing less well, has hugely increased. And there's something needs to be fixed here. And that's a public authority's responsibility. That's a democratic responsibility. You need to look at fiscal systems. You need to look at social systems. These are very urgent matters we need to address in our society. Social contract has to be rewritten, especially in the middle of an industrial revolution and this fundamental transformation. And everybody should understand that if, especially, I would say, if you have a critical mass of people who feel that they're being left behind, it's not because they feel it, but because they are, then they will stop the transformation. And I have full understanding for that. So to make sure that on all these levels, we show to people that it's in their interest we're doing this. This goes back to the first question that was also put. Who are going to be the first victims of climate change? Not the rich people. It's always going to be the people in the most vulnerable positions. And we need to make sure that their interests are addressed, visibly addressed, and they see that they are addressed and they feel part of this transformation.
Yeah, and we're reporting and interviewing and meeting people from all walks of life here on Euronews every day and witnessing exactly the issues that you've been describing there and talking to people who really feel left out and really not listened to. But anyway, that's perhaps a debate for another day. Now we can move on with a question from Youth and Environment Europe.
Hi, my name is Elisha Winkel and I'm the Liaison Officer on Climate Change for Youth and Environment Europe, the largest independent European network of youth environmental organizations. For us, although at times it could be more ambitious, the European Green Deal is proof that the climate and biodiversity crises finally get the attention they require. Our question is the following. How are you going to make sure that in the end, it's not the consumer, the people that rely on your products for lack of affordable and sustainable alternatives, that will pick up the tab for pollution caused by your activities?
Okay, who would like to tackle that question? Perhaps Jim Snabe?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to chip in. First of all, I am extremely happy to see the youth having a voice here. It is that generation and not only their agenda, but also the leadership that I see from many young people is super inspiring. I mean, first of all, we need to understand that we are at that tipping point, which I talked about, which makes sustainable technologies not more expensive, but actually cheaper. So they're not only more sustainable, they're also cheaper and potentially better. And that's always the case. There is a price curve. The wind turbine example is a good one. Europe started early to invest. At the time, it was all based on public funding. And nowadays, there is no funding to any wind turbine project that is at least respecting itself. And so you see the price curves come down on these technologies, and that's why I talked about the inflection point. The question that was asked was, how do we make sure that the youth does not pay the bill for the pollution we make? And the only way we can do that as companies is to have very ambitious plans to become carbon neutral. At Siemens, we committed in 2015 to be carbon neutral by 2030. In 2020, we reached 54% reduction compared to 15. So we are not talking about it, we are doing it. We are a bit ahead of our original plan. And the discussions in my boardrooms, both in Siemens and Maersk right now, is how do we accelerate that? Because the investments will come from business. Policymakers can help the frameworks, can help accelerate, but the doing comes from companies and from consumers. And we just have to take our part of that and be much more ambitious than what we are today.
Okay, we should be much more ambitious. Helge Lund, I believe you want to say something there. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the question. I think it's really, really important also in the context of carbon pricing that I discussed earlier. I think it's important to think that this is not a tool to increase the general cost level for people. It's really to change the societal behavior so that everyone actually has the same incentive to make the right choices when it comes to select low carbon energy instead of other choices. So this is not to increase the government tax income. It's really trying to see how we could distribute wealth in a better way, while at the same time stimulating people to make the right choices when it comes to energy.
And I believe Ignacio Galán wants to come in there. Yeah.
So I think I insist on what I was saying before. So how the consumer is going to is benefiting already now of the lower prices as consequence of the investment already done in renewables. I think I can say in Spain last week or 2 weeks ago was already an auction, and the prices for in the auction were on the level of 20s. So the market price on the low 50s. So I think they are already benefiting on that one. The second one is if we made the necessary digitalization, the more digitalization of the grid, the consumer can already play their role as managing in a better manner the electricity they are consuming. So they increase their energy efficiency and they can reduce their rate as well. Jobs. I think this investment is generating high quality of jobs, massive numbers of high quality jobs. And the companies, in our case, we are investing heavily, more than 50 hours per employee per annum, to educate and to train the people for the new needs already. And finally, and not less important, is that the most certain European countries, we are suffering a lack of population in rural areas. We are already losing huge amount of people who were living traditional rural areas and moving to other areas, generating problems. With this investment, we can fix the population there. For instance, we are already, our hydrogen power plants, where is going to be made? One is in the place where we already closed a coal power plant in the middle of nowhere. Another one beside a fertilizer company in a village in the center of the country, we was already traditionally a coal mining area, which now is suffering this problem of population. Those areas, these people are already keeping and maintaining the activity in their lives. So I think there are many ways. It's better for the consumers, it's better for the people, it's better for the rural areas. I think all this is all together. So I think the only thing I'm seeing is benefit on that one.
Okay, Ignacio Galán. Well, let's bring in another question. This one is from Generation Climate Europe.
Hey, my name is Michelle Stietz and I'm the coordinator of the Biodiversity Working Group at Generation Climate Europe, Europe's largest coalition of environmental youth-led organizations. The Green Deal is important to us as young Europeans, since climate neutral and nature positive policies will be decisive to ensure we can live on a healthy planet. Thus our question, How will you integrate risks related to business impacts and dependencies on nature in your corporate strategy and reporting? And how will you address activities upstream and downstream in your supply chains that drive climate change and environmental degradation?
That question there from Generation Climate Europe. Perhaps we can hear from Dimitri Papalexopoulos, the ERT Vice Chair, on that point.
Happy to speak as well. Well, after all that positivism, I'm also represent an industry that's more along the lines of what Frans Timmermans called bloody hard. So the cement industry is very carbon intensive. It's what's called a hard to abate sector. And it's a sector, because of that, it has started measuring emissions and verifying them externally 20 years ago. And it's something that we're working on very much. And we've put an ambition as an industry. We have signed up to construction, carbon neutral construction by 2050. And all the technologies, contrary to other areas, all the technologies are not there yet. The economics are not there. All the technologies are not there. But there has been, over the last few years, a big change in mindset from a purely defensive one, and how do we limit the damage, to one that has more along the lines of how do we accelerate the transition, how do we become more innovative, how do we get close to the customer, and how do we move this much faster. And that's where I think it's very important to come back to something that Helge Lund said earlier. This is not just about the winners, it's also about the companies that want to become greener or are trying to become greener, and how do we support these to get there faster.
And Helge Lund, I'd love to hear your perspective as well on this point, if I may.
So this is an important point. So in the context of our new strategy, the BP decided last year to do a fundamental change and be net zero by 2050. We have also upgraded and significantly refocused also our biodiversity commitments, which go beyond climate change. Among others, we have said that we will no longer go into to specific, very environmentally sensitive areas. And we also, as other companies, have a sustainability frame where we put our business within. And we report openly so that people can read, study, criticize, and engage in a dialogue on how we can also cover the biodiversity part of our business, not only climate change.
Because this, of course, an extremely important issue, especially for people this year with the lockdown. I feel like people's best friends have become the trees around them, because they've been restricted to only really spending time with themselves or with their flatmates or with their family. And there's been just a rise and so much love showed towards nature. That's the plan, of course, one of the many action plans as well that Frans Timmermans has up his sleeve. But let's move on, because we've got lots of questions to get through now. I've got one from Tony from Croatia. So, hello everyone, we're talking about the EU Green Deal, European businesses and European consumers. That's great, says Tony. But climate change is borderless. He says you might have a perfectly sustainable business in Greece, but a completely polluting factory next door in Turkey. His question is, how can government and the private sector convince and recruit those outside the European Union? Frans Timmermans, maybe? And then Jim Snabe.
Yeah, I think this is an extremely important point to make. We as Europeans are responsible for about 8% of global emissions. So everything we do is only going to be successful on a global scale if others follow suit. Now, the good news is that in the last couple of months, we've seen a speeding up of commitments from others. China committing to carbon neutrality by 2060. Japan, South Korea, climate neutral by 2050. Some others have followed, South Africa as well. And now, of course, with the Biden administration in the US giving a completely new dynamic to the climate agenda, especially leading up to the global conference we will be having in November in Glasgow. But especially for Europe, what is especially important, that's why the question is so relevant. How are we going to convince and help our immediate neighbors to move in the same direction? If you live in Croatia and you do the right measures, but if you still increase coal-fired power generation across the border in Serbia or in Kosovo or elsewhere, your air will not be as clean as it could be. So we need to help our immediate neighbors as far as we can to be part of the European plans for what we're doing with energy. They're interested in that. Our investment in clean energy generation in our immediate neighborhood is very important. I had, for instance, meetings with the Ukrainian Prime Minister last week, where also Ukraine wants to be part of our hydrogen agenda, wants to move towards cleaner energy. That's what we need to be doing. And if we are successful with our immediate neighborhood, also in North Africa, we could double the amount of green hydrogen we could produce between now and 2030. Then you're talking about at least 80 gigawatts of green hydrogen electrolyzer capability, which is really a manifest change in both the capacity to store energy. If you combine it with a huge potential of offshore wind, Siemens is a case in point. They're now designing turbines that could actually produce hydrogen directly on sea. I mean, just imagine what this is going to do. I'm really excited about that. But the general point that we need to convince others in the world to do the same is extremely relevant.
Ola Kallenius, you wanted to make a point there as well on that?
From the perspective of a global company, and you have made a very clear commitment towards CO2 neutrality, which is the case for Daimler. You don't take the view that maybe because the political will in Europe is the most ambitious, that you leave your strategy just to a European implementation. That's not what you do. So what global companies do, like Daimler and others as well, is they apply the same strategy around the world. In our particular case, we're going to turn our complete worldwide production CO2 neutral, not just here in Germany or in other European countries, in every country that we're in. And in the places where we don't yet have full access to green electricity, as an interim solution, we have to work with buying credits, but only from credible gold standard type of projects to reduce CO2 in other places. And I think one more thing that is also important in this context, you can't stop at just the borders of your own company. And this was one of the questions before. You have to look upstream and downstream. That is why we are also asking, urging, and eventually forcing our suppliers to follow our lead. So if you want to do business with Daimler in the future, you have to have a credible path to CO2 neutrality as well. And downstream, if we have these fantastic electric cars, and more of them are hitting the streets now, we got to power them with green electricity. So in the one initiative that we're part of, Ionity, for instance, here in Europe, where we're building up a fast charging infrastructure around the highway net, we're trying to exclusively do that with green electricity. So you think globally, and you also think beyond the borders of your own company. And I think that most of the serious big players are approaching it this way.
Jim Snabe, you want to make a point there briefly?
No, I think that's exactly why businesses are so important. Global companies, we all represent global companies. We have a global emission targets, not European. And that's why I think there's a combination of Europe investing to be the showcase and then global European headquartered companies exporting that technology to the rest of the world is the solution to this problem. So in that sense, I totally agree. And this is it's a huge opportunity. This is not a defensive move. It's not a way to try and make things look good. This is an opportunity to generate and develop and sell and export the sustainable solutions for the future.
Okay, well, I have a question now from Julia from Rimini. She says, ciao tutti, and she says, when I go to the market, the organic products are always much more expensive than the rest. Sometimes the difference with regular products is just ridiculous. We need to lower these prices ASAP. But how, she says, can we do this?
Hi, I am Manon Dufour, head of Brussels for E3G, an independent European climate think tank. The pace of the green transition is still uneven across European member states. how can your companies drive clean solutions deployment across Europe directly or through their place in the supply chain?
Well, there you go. You got 2 questions there. A little surprise bonus one afterwards. Frans Timmermans, would you like to tackle the first one on organic food?
Yes, I think we have 3 areas where the transformation is going to be particularly challenging. One is in everything pertaining to buildings, how existing buildings, also new construction. The second is in transport, we discussed that, and the third is in agriculture. We haven't mentioned that yet, and we need to try and convince our farmers across the European Union with support, with technological innovation, with a lot of money, that there is a huge future in an agriculture that needs less pesticides, needs less fertilizers, is more in sync with our natural environment, is not a threat to biodiversity. And organic farming is one of the answers in that. It's not the only answer, but it's one of the answers. And that's why we're encouraging now member states to adopt a reformed common agricultural policy that would allow for more so-called eco schemes, that would allow for more support for farmers who want to move to a production which is no longer harmful to our environment. If we increase the level of production, if we increase the level of transformation, then obviously there will be much more offer on the market, and then the prices will go down. And apart from that, I think we also need to look at fiscal instruments to make sure that the price difference between food that is produced in a completely unsustainable way and food that is produced in a sustainable way is reduced. Taxation will have to play a role in that. And the message which is most difficult in this context is that in our food production over the last decades, we have concentrated way too much on making it as cheap as possible. And we should be looking more at making it as healthy as possible and in harmony with natural environments. But that's a very difficult message to bring across if that would mean higher food prices, especially for people already in a precarious situation. The less you have in income, the bigger the percentages you spend on primary products such as food. So here again, I think there should be a fiscal system installed that would help people make the transition towards healthier and sustainable food.
Thanks, Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans there. Dimitri Papalexopoulos, did you want to bring in your point there, mention something?
Well, the one thing I wanted to note is that there is no one-size-fits-all solutions. And beyond some overarching policies that we talked about, we have to get specific with complex solutions to complex problems. So food, buildings, cars or mobility, cement and steel, they all have to have different approaches. And we can't pretend that we have a silver bullet to address everything.
Of course, no silver bullet. As a reporter in Brussels, that's a word we hear a lot of the time. There's no silver bullet. I'd like to now bring in a question from Can Europe.
My name is Wendell Trio. I'm the Director of Climate Action Network Europe, an umbrella organization representing over 180 NGOs that work on climate policy in Europe. We are obviously very interested in the European Green Deal, as it is one of the ways to further climate action in Europe. In order to achieve climate neutrality, we will need a massive scale-up of renewable energy production in Europe. My question is how the industry sector in particular can contribute to this increase of renewable energy, and what kind of measures that you can take to make that happen.
There you go. I mean, we've touched on this slightly already, but Ilham Kadri, would you like to come in there, please?
Sorry, Meabh, I couldn't hear the question.
So the question was really about renewable energies, about putting fossil fuels behind us and what industry is doing right now to speed up that transition.
Yeah, so let me give you an example of Solvay. Obviously, we've been around for more than 160 years. We just launched our Solvay One Planet a year ago, and on the around three pillars: climate, resources, and better life. And on the climate, we joined the Paris Agreement, the SBTi Scope 3, so including our suppliers and customers. And we declared that we're going to abandon coal, which is a big deal for our company because we started our first venture 160 years ago with coal as an energy. And we're going to do it by 2030. We don't know how to do it across the board, but we know we're going to do it. And I gave you the Bulgaria example where, you know, we are still looking for options. So replacing coal with, for example, refuse-derived fuel, it's a fuel produced from various types of waste, as much as municipal solid waste, industrial waste, or commercial waste. And when you reuse a waste, it's not a waste anymore, right? You recycle it, and that's what we've done already in Germany, in Bernberg and Rheinberg, and we're negotiating in other manufacturing sites now in France and Spain to do the same. The rest is renewable, and it was well said, right? As much as renewable is becoming cheaper and cheaper, and that's a journey towards green energy, green hydrogen, sorry, where we are a big player in the value chain of membranes for green hydrogen. You know, you will see the cost curve becoming more affordable, and therefore we are building value chains now in Europe and considering investments for green hydrogen. So you need infrastructure, right? You need to make those renewable energy at scale. You need infrastructure in EV, you know, so we gave, you know, a lot the example of cars, right, and what's going on in the car industry. We are also, you know, a player in the EV. And to give you an example, about a third of the new cars in Europe by 2030 will be EV, right? And the sales of electrical chargeable car in the EU increased by 110% over the past 3 years, whereas the number of charging points grew only by 58%. And half of the cost of the cars just 3 years ago was the battery, right? And we are working, innovating to make it smaller, more affordable. And now it's 1/3 of the car. And we know that in the future generation, it's going to get cheaper. So we need that the companies can do a lot in building that competitiveness along with the EU and the member of states. And when you have both and we build it at scale, it's going to become more affordable.
Okay, I'll have a question now for Frans Timmermans. It's from Owen Bannon. Frans Timmermans, he's from Transport and Environment, an NGO here in Brussels. And he says a fifth of all CO2 emissions come from road transport, and it's a major cause of air pollution. He said, when should the EU set the end of date for the sale of fossil fuel cars?
Well, that is not the approach the Commission chooses. I know that some member states and also some other countries want to set an end date for ICEs. We've always chosen the process of reducing emissions. And we are now in the process of looking at further legislation for after 2020, for 2030 and beyond in this area. I think this is the road to go, and I think it would also offer the automotive industry the right incentive to move into the direction of emission-free mobility. But it's not by mentioning an end date of ICE sales. It's by looking at carbon pricing, obviously, to what extent ETS can play a role in transport, but especially also at levels of emissions, as we've done in the past. And as, to be very honest with you, the automotive industry has been able to adapt to, even though we were often told they weren't. But we've seen now, you know, only recently everybody was saying there were going to be massive fines because they didn't make it. But the reality is fortunately a lot better than we had thought. So I think there is no reason for us to change course on that. And also, I think, you know, this industry, which was going to go through an incredible transformation, a fundamental transformation. This is really tectonic. This is not just moving within a technology to something else. No, fundamental transformation. They should be able to predict what public authorities are doing, and they should be able to adapt to the need to go to zero emission transportation, because transportation needs will certainly not diminish.
Okay, thanks, Frans Timmermans. And we have a question now from European Climate Foundation.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to raise a question at this very timely ERT roundtable. My name's Erica Hope, and I'm the Director for Climate Planning and Laws at the European Climate Foundation. And my question for you today is the following. In its position on the European climate law, the European Parliament proposes that the European Commission should prepare sectoral decarbonisation roadmaps. In principle, these roadmaps could help to mobilise investment in the needed industrial ecosystems, engage stakeholders, and also ensure an integrated approach to decarbonisation across the economy. What role could you see for these roadmaps playing for your sector? And what would you want the Commission to pay attention to in the way that they prepare them? Thank you, and have a good conference.
Thanks for that question. Perhaps Dimitri Papalexopoulos, do you want to tackle that question on behalf of everybody?
I think I already tackled it in the sense that we agree that there should be sector-specific approaches to many problems that cannot be solved with overarching policies. So it's fully in agreement with what is implied by the question.
Sure. Well, let's move on. I have another question here because we talked a lot about hydrogen. We've heard a lot about the future of hydrogen during the last hour and a half. And there's a question here about Airbus, that they want to, of course, build the first hydrogen commercial airplane to be ready by 2035. And the question is, what if their big bet fails? Who would like to answer that?
We all want to answer that, is my impression. But, again, there isn't a silver bullet in any sector. And air transportation will remain extremely important for our economy and also in terms of the social importance of it. So we need to make sure that we reduce the carbon footprint. Now, given global developments, I think it's looking better than a couple of years ago. The Chinese and the Americans and others moving in that direction. But it's not just about hydrogen fuel planes. It's also about a different sorts of fuel that could be used, synthetic fuels that have a future, using biofuels to some extent. So we have to look at it from many, many angles. There's not one silver bullet, but there are ways of decarbonizing also air transport. But, let's be clear, you cannot have electric planes, well, small ones, but not that will not provide for the real solution. So you need other solutions. Hydrogen will be a big deal of this. I think Airbus has a good chance of being successful in that area. But even if that takes longer, it will be a success. But even if it takes longer, there are other ways of already reducing the carbon footprint. And we are talking to the industry all the time about this.
Ilham Kadri, you want to make a point there?
Yeah, I think, we believe at Solvay that, both electricity and hydrogen will coexist in cleaner mobility and beyond. And it's exciting developments. We see it. And it's a journey. We call it the journey from grey to green hydrogen. And it's taking off because the cost of renewable electricity is falling. So to give you an example, the cost of electrolyzer have been around minus 50% between 14 and 19. And public policies, as Frans Timmermans just said, push in this direction, which will lead to a very strong traction on technologies entering to that area. And I think the EU Green Deal leads to the installation of those gigawatts of renewables. So I think that this journey, it's a journey, right? We're not going to do it overnight. We should be agnostic to technology, even if we bring technology to the table. So it's about the Green Deal. It's about, the cleaner mobility. And you will see that, the EV batteries, yes, it's going to happen. You will see hydrogen and green hydrogen going to probably truck, buses, trains, why not aerospace, right? And when we will build it at scale, when the cost of renewable is going to decrease, you will see that more and more the green hydrogen will become a reality.
Okay, Ilham Kadri. Now, we have just about 1 minute till the end of our panel, but we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to turn them into remarks. I'm going to turn them into comments or just pieces of reflection that you can take away, I suppose, from this. So we've tons of questions coming in from Instagram about what kind of jobs can green transition create in different businesses. I guess we touched on that. Why are we getting greener, but then we're importing energy from Morocco where it's not green? Another question, when will any legislation be passed related to the EU Green Deal? Another question, how much money would governments have to spend in order to use clean energy? Another question, is 2050 really ambitious? It sounds slow, given the consequences we're already seeing every single day. Another question, are we going to do something about Asia and their pollution? Another question, are we going to change cars if battery technology is far away from sustainable? And we have a comment here from Sigrid. Good to know that the panel acknowledges the need to stay within the boundaries that Mother Nature sets, and it's also good to acknowledge the borrowing from the future. However, deafening silence about the much bigger subsidy from the past is concerning. Do these leaders understand the implications, and should they not be prepared for what will be a bigger change than the panelists seem to see? A lot of other questions. One for Ola there. Will climate change require automobile manufacturers to change their business model away from personal car ownership? And if so, what will replace it? Another question. What do the panel members need to do to encourage the increased investment also needed in their upstream suppliers sector? Another question, how and why is organic farming being celebrated by the EU for its environmental credentials when consistent scientific evidence showed it's leading to greater global impact due to the inefficiencies of production? We have a long list of questions there. I'd like to invite perhaps Dimitri Papalexopoulos on behalf of the ERT, maybe just give a couple of seconds to round off and see what you take away, really take home from this debate.
Well, I would like to perhaps end up on a positive note, because I think that the words inflection point and tipping point were used a few times. And we're at a point where really one get a sense that a lot of things are aligning to make a huge leap forward possible. The politics are changing. China and the US are coming abroad. Technology is making huge leaps. The consumer and young people are providing more pressure. Investors who used to ask only about financial performance now ask about sustainability as well. And more importantly, business is now firmly on the side of trying to make this happen together with politicians. So let me finish by saying there are no simple solutions, but human ingenuity can achieve anything, and we can certainly achieve this ambitious goal.
And Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans, would you like to make a final remark there as well?
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Look, we're all moving in the same direction, and with a speed that I would have not thought possible a couple of years ago. Of course, we have to acknowledge what's happened in the past, but what we need to do now is to move away from that past immediately into the future. And the leadership shown by ERT is going to be extremely important, helping us convince other parts of industry that it's also in their interest to move along. I mean, ERT is important, but sadly, they're not the only ones. There are also parts of industry that still need convincing. And if we with society behind us, we will certainly make that. And the one thing that has encouraged me is that in the middle of this pandemic, the sense of urgency, people were surviving in survival mode, their health, their jobs, their families, and still more than 70% of Europeans want us to do something about the climate crisis. If that is not an incentive, I don't know what is. So let's get cracking.
And that's what polls are showing as well. And through our reporting here at Euronews as well, people are telling that despite COVID, climate change is really close to their hearts and minds. But I'm afraid that is all we have time for. But thank you so much to you all. I know you're all extremely busy people with a lot of things to do in your to-do list. So thank you so much to Dimitri Papalexopoulos, the ERT Vice Chair, Frans Timmermans, the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Helge Lund, CEO of BP, or Chairman of BP, and Jim Snabe from Siemens, Ola Kallenius from Daimler, Ilham Kadri from Solvay, and Ignacio Galán over in Madrid from Iberdrola. Thank you so much. And thank you to you for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your comments. I hope we can keep this debate alive online. And let's do this again when COVID arrives, but let's do it physically. Let's get a live audience of people, from young activists to farmers and miners, to sit and have this conversation together. Because as you can see, the people really want to discuss it, and we really need to have a debate all together. But for now, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.